This is a very disturbing story involving something a very prominent right-wing Christian said, but in order to make sense of it, you got to have a little background here. You know those Jubilee debates that are very popular online? Mehdi Hassan, the progressive commentator, he did a really good one with like 20 right-wing crazy people, and he debated all of them in succession. They're super popular. Well, they recently published an episode of their show where, you have one person versus 20, and they featured the right-wing commentator, Allie Beth Stuckey. And Stuckey hosts a podcast. She's a right-wing conservative Christian commentator. She is most famous these days because she just wrote a book called Toxic Empathy: How Progressives Exploit Christian Compassion. She basically says empathy is a bad thing. Empathy becomes toxic when it encourages you to affirm sin, validate lies, or support destructive policies. So Allie Beth Stuckey is basically saying, hey, Christians, you need to stop being so nice. No empathy. Which, that tracks. I don't really get empathy from conservative Christians, but it's kind of weird to see a conservative Christian telling other Christians, you know what you need less of? Niceness. Anyway, that's Allie Beth Stuckey, and Jubilee recently did an episode of their debate show, and here it is, like surrounded, one conservative Christian versus 20 liberal Christians. I would love to play a few clips for you, but I'm pretty sure they will take down this entire video if I do that, so I won't do it for you. But I will tell you this. In that video, one of the things that happens is Stuckey is obviously very adamant that her conservative interpretations of the Bible are all correct. Of course, she thinks the Bible needs to be taken a certain way. That's why she's a conservative. Well, one of her progressive Christian opponents comes up to the table and he says, how can you basically be so sure that your beliefs are accurate? After all, this person says, there were Christians in the past who thought slavery was just, and they were wrong, weren't they? So, how are you so sure you're right? Interesting question. And Allie Beth Stuckey basically ignored that question, and she said, well, the anti-slavery movement was also motivated and led by Christians who were inspired by that very same Bible, which is true. There were Christian abolitionists, but also there were very much Christians who enslaved people. So you didn't really answer the question. Okay, later on in the show, here's really what everyone was talking about. Someone flat out asked her, is slavery wrong? And she said, yes, of course. And then the follow-up question from the debater is, do you agree with John MacArthur's statements when he says that slavery can be great if you have the right master? And she says, basically, I don't believe he said that. But then she says, I condemn all dehumanization and all objectification of people who are all made in the image of God. No person should be owned. Which, okay, fine. I'll give you credit for that one, right? You said something that should not be controversial. Nobody should be owned. Good for you. Do I really have to give you credit for saying something so obvious? Okay, so that's what happened in the debate. I want to show you a couple things now. First, John MacArthur really did say that, and I will play you that clip. Here you go.
It is a little strange that we have such an aversion to slavery because historically there have been abuses. There have been abuses in marriage. We don't have an aversion to marriage, particularly, because there have been abuses. So to throw out slavery as a concept simply because there have been abuses, I think, is to miss the point. For many people, poor people, perhaps people who weren't educated, perhaps people who had no other opportunity, working for a gentle, caring, loving master was the best of all possible worlds. If you had the right master, everything was taken care of. Slavery is not objectionable if you have the right master. It's the perfect scenario.
the perfect scenario. Holy shit. So that is something that John MacArthur said. He's probably still to this day yelling it up here from 6 feet under. Anyway, commentary like that is why a lot of people were not sad when that man passed away. The point is, John MacArthur really did say that. He said slavery is awesome as long as you have a good master, which is a weird thing to say. Allie Beth Stuckey admitted slavery was bad, which should be obvious, but also she denied that MacArthur said that. He very much did say that. But okay, that's the backdrop for what I'm about to show you. Because what I really wanted to show you is this right here. On the left side of your screen, that would be Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth. And this guy right here is a right-wing podcast host, a Christian nationalist named Joshua Haymes. He hosts a podcast called Reformation Red Pill. So very conservative podcast. Pete Hegseth appeared on that show last year before he was Secretary of Defense. They talked for like 6 hours. And how did you even get in touch with the third-rate weekend anchor of Fox and Friends? Because at the time, I think, this guy right here, Joshua Haymes, he was a pastoral intern at a church, and Pete Hegseth went to that church. So that's how these two got in touch. The point is, these two are in the same circles, right? I'm going to give you a little more background here. Haymes hosts that Reformation Red Pill podcast with a guy named Brooks Pottinger, and Brooks Pottinger is the pastor of the church, Pilgrim Hill Reformed Fellowship. And the New York Times actually did an article on Pete Hegseth last December, and this is what they said. In Tennessee, the Hegseth family joined Pilgrim Hill Reformed Fellowship, a small church opened in 2021 as part of the growing communion of Reformed evangelical churches. The denomination was co-founded by Doug Wilson. His name should be familiar to a lot of you, a pastor based in Moscow, Idaho. His religious empire now includes a college, a classical school network, a publishing house, a podcast network, and multiple churches, among other entities. So this is very much not just a conservative church. It's a women should not vote, the man should do all the thinking for the family kind of church. Pete Hegseth is a part of that denomination. It's run by this podcast host, and Pete Hegseth is buddy-buddy with the other podcast host. Okay, that's the important thing for you to hear. So that guy, Joshua Haymes, who was in that picture with Pete Hegseth, I want to play for you a clip of what Haymes just said, because he's very mad at Allie Beth Stuckey because of what she said about slavery. Because if you recall from seconds ago, Allie Beth Stuckey is like, I don't believe John MacArthur said slavery is good if you have the right master, which is something he said. But then Allie Beth Stuckey said, of course, slavery is bad. No one should own another human being. Well, guess what Joshua Haymes says about that?
The institution of slavery is not inherently evil. I know. Some of you guys are upset by that. Some of you guys are saying, I've been saying that for years. Okay, I'll take it a step further. It is not inherently evil to own another human being. Watch out for the chronological snobbery. All right, watch out for it. Do not condemn our forefathers who may have been treating their slaves biblically. And in fact, it was such like 2% of the Americas, right, actually owned slaves. And anyone who actually engaged in real abuse, yeah, we condemn that. We condemn treating other image bearers as subhuman. That's evil. That's bad. That's not good. We can condemn that, okay? But we cannot condemn the entire institution of slavery like outright. We just cannot do that because the Bible does not do that.
You can't condemn slavery? What is going on with Pete Hegseth's church? Like, this is not a tough moral dilemma. It's slavery. It's inherently wrong and immoral. You don't have to dissect that one. It's not up for debate. There's no good way of depriving another human being of their freedom. Like, it takes religion to convince people that something so obviously evil is both God-sanctioned and wonderful, as long as it's done the right way. You guys, come on. If they are bad slave owners, of course that's bad. But why won't anyone think of the good slave owners? That's seriously the Christian message we are getting from this guy. Like, this is the problem with Christian nationalism. It is a movement that uses the Bible to cover up its own moral decay. Right? If you think about the horror of slavery, which is like the ultimate dehumanization, and you pretend it's compatible with Christianity, this ain't theology anymore. It's a self-own. You are admitting there is something wrong with your religion. You are using religion to justify cruelty in a way that's so much worse than all the other ways they do that. And by the way, that is how Pete Hegseth has operated since his promotion from the backbench at Fox News to the leader of the armed forces, basically treating the US military as if it's an extension of his desire for a Christian crusade. Like, I know Hegseth doesn't have integrity to believe with, but if he did, someone would hold him accountable for what this guy just said because they're part of the same church network. You know it would happen if it happened to any Democrat. If the pastor of your church says something, do you remember Barack Obama and Reverend Jeremiah Wright? If your pastor says something objectionable, or the guy who worked at the church who said something objectionable, of course the person's going to be held accountable for it, even if you disagree, even if you weren't there when it happened. How come Hegseth's not being held accountable for what this guy just said? Right? But Hegseth won't be held accountable to it because the media is not going to do that to him. He is incapable from criticizing someone from his own tribe. And his silence in the face of this should be complicity. For everyone else, for decent people of faith, for decent people who are non-religious, the media, who's actually good at their jobs, comments like these should be met with moral outrage. This should be a national scandal. It's not, because, I don't know, they don't care about any of this stuff. They're numb to the horrible things Christian nationalists do. But there can be no biblical defense for owning another human being. There's no right way to commit an evil act. And any religion that says otherwise is not a religion worth following. And this guy is admitting his religion is not worth following because he can't even bring himself to say slavery is bad. He is justifying slavery if done a certain way. I mean, if you are excusing slavery, you are rejecting humanity. You are rejecting the core of what humanity is. And it is so deeply telling that a religious group promoting that kind of thinking has huge fans in the current Republican administration. So I just wanted to show you that clip, and you should spread it and link it to Hegseth, because this is the church he goes to. They're in the same circles. This is the sort of stuff they preach. It's disturbing. I will leave it there, I guess. What questions we got here? I'd like to know if he'd be willing to trade places with the slave with a good master. I love the question. I love the fact that maybe that question makes him do some logical gymnastics, because eventually he'll be like, yeah, it would be fine if I had a good master, because the good master would let me do whatever I want, which is totally not how it works, right? Like, they would find a way to rationalize it so they don't look like hypocrites, but they're hypocrites. Secretary of War. Oh, you're right. I'm sorry. I said Pete Hegseth was the defense secretary. Nope, he's the war secretary, because we live in a very dumb country that wants to hurt everybody. It just occurred to me, do all power-hungry political personalities have a religious pastor to complete their circle of actors for manipulation? The answer is yes. I mean, we're not even talking about the Bible study that is being run in the White House right now and in Congress. We're not talking about Mike Johnson or Caroline Leavitt or Pam Bondi or any of these people who love to wear their cross necklaces while they dehumanize people who are brown and poor and trans and anything that they don't like. Image bearers mean they believe some ethnicities don't bear the image and are therefore okay to enslave. That's Rushdoony's argument. There may be some truth to that, but also, who are the image bearers? I don't know if it just applies to people who are not white, but people who don't think or act the way they do. It would extend to them as well. I'm not sure. Oh, Imago Dei, that's the word I missed there. But yeah, I mean, the fact that if you think anybody is okay to enslave, you're the problem now.